I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and this is the comparison that I've been waiting all year to run. Two of Australia's most affordable new electric vehicles, the brand new BYD Dolphin and the MG4, which has been on the market for a couple of months. Which one is best? In today's video, I'm going to let you know which one I would buy. I'll let you know which one might suit you based on your preferences. We'll check on the interiors, we'll discuss the practicalities and the running costs, and of course we'll take them for a drive, and I'll let you know which one I think is best. But before we get started, hit subscribe down below. Chasing Cars, honest reviews of your next car. Brought to you by Budget Direct. The way the BYD Dolphin range is structured is a little bit different to the MG4. In the MG4, you can actually choose your battery size with the base trim. So the car we've got here actually has the smallest battery and the lowest trim, making it really affordable. In the BYD Dolphin, if you want to get the premium trim, which is what we've got here, you automatically get a bigger battery, whereas the base model BYD Dolphin, which I don't think anyone has driven yet, has a smaller battery and quite a bit less in terms of specification. The upshot though is that the BYD Dolphin Premium is the price of the MG4 base model with the bigger battery. So if you go for the BYD, you're getting a slightly narrower car by about 7 centimeters, but you're getting a similar sized battery, similar efficiency, similar range, but a higher level of interior trim at the same price. Hopefully that makes sense. So what are we looking at here in the Dolphin Premium? Well, we're looking at seats, which are quite nice. They are a vinyl on the outside and then kind of like a neoprene sort of material in the center. And these seats are heated. The steering wheel is artificial leather or vinyl, no paddle shifters. And we're looking forward at an instrument cluster, which looks quite similar to what you see in a Volkswagen ID.3 or a Cupra Born. But then it's here in the center where the Dolphin has its real centerpiece. It's got a big touchscreen here with better, quicker, more rapid, more polished software than what you get in the MG. Everything works extremely fast. The processing power is excellent. We have inbuilt navigation in this car. We have Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, inbuilt Spotify, a data connection. Everything feels a bit of a cut above the smaller, more low res, less snappy screen in the MG. Plus, just like the BYD Atto 3, the Dolphin can do that. You can actually run your screen in portrait or in landscape orientation, but I found that with polarized sunglasses, common here in Australia, you can't actually see the screen when it's in portrait when you wear your sunnies. At least I couldn't. You do get physical controls for things like your volume down here, which is a roller, your regen strength, fan on and off, and also your direction selector, which is this little toggle here, and your parking brake, traction control, just ahead of this wireless charger. There is loads of space, a tiny bit of covered space, and then this open area down beneath this big blade that strikes through the center of the car. Material quality, it's pretty honest, just like the MG4. Hard touch doors, but you do get some soft inserts, and that neoprene sort of material is repeated here on the dash. So much like in the MG, you know it's not an expensive car, it's honest and mainstream in the interior, but it is relatively comfortable, and the technology is a real highlight in the Dolphin. Just like the BYD Dolphin, the MG4's interior is fairly conservative in a black and grey theme, but the MG4 is even more conservative. Its entire center console looks pretty much like what you'd see in a normal hatchback in this segment, not far apart from the likes of something like a Toyota Corolla. That's exactly the point. The MG4 is a very normal feeling EV, which will mean it's quite appealing to a lot of people. And it does in fact feel very approachable and normal for the most part. But while build quality is generally quite good in the MG4, and this is about the 5th or 6th we've tested, that's why you might see a variety of different colors of the same trim grade in this particular video, and the seats are also very comfortable and the best seats in this comparison for how supportive and shapely they are. In other ways, the MG4's interior isn't up to scratch. Firstly, the 10-inch screen up here is fine in size, but its responsiveness is laggy and its software is more buggy than what you get in the BYD, which just feels like it's had a few more months of extra development in order to get everything snappy and working perfectly. There's also no integrated navigation in this particular trim grade, which is the Excite. Now, this particular Excite has the small battery, the 50 kilowatt hour battery, but you can get one with a 60 kilowatt hour battery for pretty much the same price as the BYD, still in Excite trim. So for all intents and purposes, this is the interior that competes with the BYD on price. The other issue with the MG4's interior is actually just this direction selector down here, where occasionally you'll jump into the car and there can be real difficulties getting the car to recognize that you're sitting here and get into gear. It sounds like a silly thing, but all of our road testers have experienced this problem at least a couple of times in any flavor of MG4 we get through. You have to seriously stand on the brakes in order to get the car to recognize you're sitting here. That's just never a problem in the BYD Dolphin or virtually any other car we test. So hopefully a software update could fix that one up. In terms of material quality, you do get a squidgy dash, nice leather steering wheel and armrests, but there are a lot of other hard materials and also an unfortunately placed bit of trim here, which people with longer legs report can be a little bit sore on road trips. In terms of storage, loads of open space and a closed bin down here, nice little net for keys or something like that, and a deeper center bin than what you get in the Dolphin. Just like the MG4, the BYD Dolphin sits on a long wheelbase compared to its overall length, and much of that wheelbase is dedicated to backseat space. So even though in Australia, this class of car, small hatchbacks, they're not typically family cars anymore, they are still family cars in Europe, and that's why you can see BYD has chosen to make the backseat really big. Legroom is good. This seat's in my driving position, 6 foot tall, 183 centimeters, and I've got good leg room. Toe room is tight, however. You could get somebody here in the center. There's a completely flat floor, and headroom behind the sunroof is actually fine for my height. The issue is the seat base is too low, so you really have to splay your legs in order to get comfortable. As it is, they are sitting with a gap between my legs and the seat, which is a bit unfortunate. In terms of amenities back here, there's a little bit of soft touch on the door, but not much. You get a single cup holder, 2 USB ports, seat back pockets, but unlike the MG4, you actually do have a flip down armrest, which is nice with a couple more cup holders built into it. So while it's not the most comfortable place to spend time, it's spacious and very usable. While the space on offer is very similar in the MG4 to the BYD Dolphin in the back seat, the MG4 is actually more comfortable in the back, and that's because the seat base is angled quite distinctly upwards and it supports your legs much better than the same base in the Dolphin. But otherwise, legroom, headroom, and even toe room are so similar as to really not be a distinctive point between either car for adults sitting in the back. The third seat is perhaps slightly less usable in the MG4 because the floor isn't entirely flat, but it is almost flat, and there isn't a center armrest in the MG4. Otherwise, all so similar. No air vents and only one USB port here in the back of the MG. So when it comes to the battle of the boots, it's not a huge surprise that the car which is slightly bigger has a bigger boot. That is the MG4. It's about 7 centimeters wider than the BYD, but the length is almost identical. I find this plays some visual tricks. To me, the BYD looks a lot smaller, but in actual fact, it is the same length within 3 mils, but it is narrower. Now, opening up the manual tailgate of the MG4, you find 363 litres of space. The load height is not too high, but there is a drop down to the boot floor. There's one net on the side. Here's a little suitcase with our home charger, and then beneath the floor, just a compressor and a goo kit. No spare wheel in this car, but nice and easy to close. What about the BYD? Now, we have been told that BYD is going to start removing the Build Your Dreams script from their cars in future, but the Dolphin still has it here in this ski grey colour. Beneath the manual tailgate, very light manual tailgate of the Dolphin, there is a smaller boot. On paper, 345 litres. I think you'll agree it looks quite a bit smaller than that of the MG4. The load height is actually a little bit higher on this car, but so is the floor, so you're not having to drop things into it. Beneath that boot floor, you actually get more space, so that's where it is actually making up the difference. There is a suitcase with your charging cables, but it's very deep in there, and a couple of nets for your stuff as well. Cargo blind, but it doesn't actually clip in, it just sort of sits there, which feels a bit cheap. But again, the tailgate is relatively easy to close. When it came to range and charging, there are some key differences to be aware of. As I mentioned up front, the Dolphin Premium in this comparison has a bigger battery than the base MG4, so the comparison isn't entirely straight. Because our time with the Dolphin was so short, we've also only tested urban range for that car at this point. With that in mind, we saw consumption of 14.3 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers in our urban range test with the Dolphin, meaning a range of 423 k's from its 60.5 kilowatt hour usable battery. Not bad, given the claim is 426 kilometers. By comparison, the MG4 51 kilowatt hour actually managed to beat its WLTP claim in the same urban range test. It achieved 357 kilometers of urban range from its smaller 50.8 kilowatt hour usable battery with consumption of 14.2 kilowatt hours per 100 k's. Charging speeds also differ, depending on the grade you buy in both cars. In the MG4's case, the base 51 kilowatt hour variant can charge at up to 88 kilowatt DC, though more expensive variants can be charged at 117 kilowatt or 140 kilowatt. In the Dolphin's case, the base dynamic grade can only be charged at 60 kilowatt DC, while the premium here can take 80 kilowatt. So in this comparison, we're kind of going into it already knowing that the MG4 is really good to drive. Not quite brilliant, but very, very good. Competitive with cars like the Cupra Born, which is quite a lot more expensive than the MG4, especially if you look at this car from the base model, which I've said a few times on the channel is sort of all you need. If you want more range, MG have 3 different battery sizes to sell you, which is a great benefit. But if you can live with kind of 320 k's of urban range and a bit less than that on the highway, then the base model is sort of where it's at, the 51 kilowatt hour. However, on price terms, the Excite 64 kilowatt hour is the car that actually competes with the Dolphin Premium, and that's going to give you a similar sort of 400 kilometer urban range to what you get in the Dolphin, sort of around that low 300s mark on the highway. The good news is that pretty much no matter what battery size you choose, the MG4 is really sweet to drive. This one is the very sweetest because it's light, but the thing that you can tell in all of the MG4s, except the top of the range X-Power, is they all feel very clearly rear-wheel drive. Now, if you don't really know what that means or you don't care, that's fine. You can tune out for the next 20 seconds. But what it is that the motor is actually at the back of this car. It drives the rear wheels, which means the front wheels, all they have to do is the turning. And so you get this very pure dynamic where you don't get any torque steer at all through the steering wheel. The front wheels are able to do the braking and the stopping, that's all they have to do. The rear wheels have lots of grip because the weight transfers to the back when you're accelerating, which is exactly what you want for grip. And you can also steer the car a little bit with the throttle in the corners by adding a tiny bit of oversteer, nothing unsafe, just a little nipping at your line. Now, if you're a keen driver, all of that will be music to your ears, and the MG4 is really pleasant in that way, but it's also just as easy to drive around town. It's comfortable. There's an underlying firmness, which I think a lot of people will like, but compliance is good. It traverses bumps pretty well. However, there is a little bit of fidget in the cabin when you start bringing it onto more difficult B roads like this one, and that's where the BYD is softer. It's going to be a little bit more comfortable, although the MG's body control is a little bit better than the BYD. These cars are both quiet, their refinement is good. There's a bit of motor whine, particularly here in the MG, but visibility out is good, seat comfort is better out of these two cars. So actually, as a vehicle to do road tripping in or to go and find good country roads, the MG is just clearly a little bit more rewarding, though its interior isn't quite as impressive or as high-tech as what you get in the BYD. So it's kind of about what your preferences are in this segment. Just like the BYD, the regen braking could be better, could be more instant, could be stronger, but out of these two cars, the regen is a little bit better here in the MG4. In terms of safety, it's got a long list of safety tech, but the lane keep assist is a bit dodgy. It sort of pogos from line to line and beeps at you loudly. We actually don't have blind spot monitoring here in the base model MG4. You have to walk up the range for stuff like that, but we do have lane centering and also adaptive cruise control. So putting it up against the really very capable MG4, what is the BYD Dolphin like to drive? Well, this comparison isn't a cakewalk for the MG4, as good as it is, because BYD has clearly put in the work in tuning the Dolphin as well. And this isn't that much of a surprise because the Atto 3 managed to sweep aside 16 other small SUVs in our recent small SUV mega test, and it came second to the Skoda Kamiq. So that's an amazing achievement for a new car. So it's not that surprising that the Dolphin is also pretty capable, having been engineered by the same team at the same proving grounds over in China, but clearly with Western input, because this car is, semi-European in driving feel, in the way that it's damped, the way that it's suspended. Now, there appears to be a pretty big gap in the BYD range, in the Dolphin range I should say, between the base model, which has only 70 kilowatts of power. On paper it looks like it's going to be painfully slow. It's got a torsion beam rear suspension, but it's got a small battery, so it's very light. And then there's a $6,000 step up to the premium, which has a massive mechanical change to a 150 kilowatt motor with 310 Newton meters of torque, so a lot more torque than the MG4. It's actually the Atto 3 motor and battery effectively being transplanted here into the Dolphin, and the results are as you would expect. The throttle might be a bit doughy in eco mode, but put it in sport mode and the Dolphin Premium is quite a quick car. Sub 7 seconds 0 to 100 sprints are easily achievable, so it is a bit quicker than an MG4 Excite, but not by very much, only by sort of half a second or so if you care about that sort of thing. Now, out of these two cars, the Dolphin is definitely more softly suspended and the ride quality is a little bit better. It's less troubled by bumps on the road. Even here on this relatively difficult and bumpy B road just outside of Sydney, you notice fewer bumps in the cabin, but the body control isn't quite as good or as sporty as the MG4, and so you are able to tackle country roads a little bit more confidently and quickly in the MG4, even if it isn't quite as comfortable. The other big difference is the Dolphin is front wheel drive rather than rear wheel drive like the MG4, so you can't quite push on as hard, but it's still very agile, very fun, and a really spirited little car to drive around on your errands. And I've actually found myself really enjoying this car, and the comparison is kind of to something like an i20N, much softer than that car, but similarly quick, similarly agile, similarly fun. It's just that BYD have their electric alternative on the market now, and the likes of Hyundai just don't. Their EVs are far more expensive. In terms of refinement, it is louder in here, mainly wind noise. The safety systems, it has that long list just like the MG, but again, the tuning isn't quite there. Lane keep assist, pogos. We do have blind spot monitoring and an excellent 360-degree camera with crystal clear graphics, however. One thing that should be mentioned though is the tyres fitted to the Dolphin. In Australia, they are an off-brand Linglong tyre. Grip in the dry is just about acceptable. We haven't had enough rain in order to let me test it properly in wet weather over the last few days. But from experience on tyres like this, they're just not generally up to snuff in the wet, and even coming off speed bumps in the dry, the tyres actually break traction a little bit if you accelerate a bit too hard. You know, compared to the MG4's Continentals, it just comes up a little bit short. So I'd be leaving money in the budget to replace these tyres with something a little bit more trustworthy. So that brings us to the need for a verdict. Both of these cars accomplish really highly for their affordable price, given that they're both fully electric. But I think one of each will suit different buyers. For me, I really like my classic rear-wheel drive dynamics, so the MG4 is the car that I would take home. I tend to take my cars out on the weekend, find a sporty bit of road, and really exploit their handling. And despite being a pretty reasonable appliance, the MG4 is a little better to drive out of this pair. But the BYD in many ways actually feels like the more finished car. The cabin technology is more polished, it's got more features, it has fewer bugs, and the ride quality is even better in the BYD Dolphin than in the MG4. So if you want better tech, higher comfort, I would suggest the BYD. If you want really good driving dynamics, I would go to the MG. So hopefully that makes sense. What's your opinion? Let me know down below this video. While you're there, make sure to hit subscribe and the notification bell so you don't miss out on more content like this. Make sure you share this video with anyone you know considering an EV purchase. And as always, thank you for watching Chasing Cars.